Hello, and welcome again to the J Axis on YouTube. This is going to be the third episode. We're going to be discussing extraterrestrials. I've had a lot of people request this subject and for me to discuss a little bit about it, so I'm going to touch on a few different things that have to do with this subject. And for me, it's always been something, even I can remember when I was little, believing in. And I can really remember an account from this movie called Fire in the Sky that was based on a true story about a guy named Travis Dalton he allegedly abducted and was gone for 5 days. And when it happened, he was a lumberjack and he was working with a few of his friends at nighttime. And as they were leaving to go home for the night, um, noticed a UFO up in the sky, and Travis, being the brave one in the group, decided he was going to jump out of the truck that they were all in and go check it out. And as he was outside of the truck checking it out, a light shined down, and the guy that was in the truck just took off. You know what I mean? Got scared and took off. But after a few minutes and everybody talking to each other, they decided they needed to go back and check on Travis and get him. And when they went back, he was just gone. And he was gone for 5 days and suddenly just reappeared naked and, disoriented 5 days later. And for a while, he couldn't remember what had happened to him, and slowly, through, memory regressions, was able to remember some of the stuff that happened to him. And it was, strange accounts. If you've never seen the movie or heard the story, definitely look into it. But one of the things that really stood out to me in the story, because, it's not just a movie, it's based on real events or based on a true story. And the people that were with Travis, there was a lot of speculation about them and whether they had anything to do with him disappearing. And because of this, the police that were in the area they were from gave them lie detector tests. And in every single occasion, they had to take them a few times, they all passed with flying colors that what they were saying was true. And collectively, like that, I think it would be very hard to fake something like that. So that really stood out to me, as well as just after watching the movie and kind of looking more into it and seeing the actual Travis Dalton and his accounts and reading things that he said, it feels very genuine the way that he describes things. So that was something that I remember when I was little first finding it, and kind of got me into the subject about extraterrestrials. And, the word that we use for what we call them, extraterrestrials, it means from beyond Earth, literally. And that's very much possible that they come from another planet, from a solar system other than ours, that's within the same universal space. But I also think it could be very possible that these UFOs and these encounters that people have, and that witnessing things that they do, could be extra dimensional, meaning that they come from a space and time that is beyond ours, meaning they could be from time traveling from the future, or they could be literally different beings that are traveling interdimensionally. And when you start thinking about that in any sense, whether they're extraterrestrial or extra dimensional, here on Earth, we're made up of carbon, you know what I mean? That's the basis of our bodies. And that doesn't necessarily have to reign true universally or multiversally throughout life. It just depends on different planets in which these beings evolved on, and the environments, just like any other evolution, which I think it's really interesting, when people report what we call the grays, or what some people would call the Zetans. They always are described as being sort of, with the gray complexion and the big round eyes. And if you were to think about what environment they would have to be in to evolve the way they are said to appear, they would have to have an environment with much less light than we do, as why the big eyes and the dark, so they can see better throughout dark areas. The way they're described as being thinner and having longer limbs, and things like that, sort of plays into lower gravity than we experience here on Earth, and that's why they're not as heavy, but they're lighter. Um, Another movie that I watched when I was a teenager, so Evolution. It's actually a comedy, but it deals with aliens in that movie as well. And one thing that I thought was interesting in that movie is the aliens in that movie are not carbon based as humans are, but they were nitrogen based. And the way that they defeat the aliens is they say, all right, well, if this is where carbon appears on the periodic table, then you go down a couple and over one, and there's arsenic, and that's poisonous to us. And these aliens are nitrogen based, and let's do the same thing starting from nitrogen down a couple and then over. And there's selenium, so that means maybe selenium is poisonous to them the way the arsenic is to us. And that actually works at the end of the movie. And I always thought that was like a really cool idea. And who's to say that any beings that are from beyond Earth and the circumstances of whatever the environment is on the planet or the area that they grew up, that they're not, they are made up of carbon or possibly something different. You know what I mean? I always thought that was a really cool idea. With the extraterrestrial accounts, of course, you got to play UFOs into it. UFOs are definitely one of the biggest aspects of it, and there's many ancient accounts of it, but the ones that really started blowing up for us as a human collective, I would say, started around Roswell time in 1947. For any who are unfamiliar, Roswell was a UFO that supposedly crashed on Mac Braswell's ranch in New Mexico in 1947. And what stood out about this account is it was the first time that the military sort of admitted something unidentified as a, being possibly from beyond Earth, only to recant it the next day, of course. But they actually reported it in a newspaper that a UFO crashed, and that sort of is where the notoriety of this incident comes from. Is it was the first time the military actually gave credence to these ideas, and the main guy on the scene, Jesse Marcel, actually, gave interviews afterwards, and he was one who saw the crash, and they tried to say it was a weather balloon the next day when they recanted. And his account, of course, was, no, I'm in the military, I know what a weather balloon looks like, this is not a weather balloon. He actually took some of the samples from the crash and did his own tests on them, where he would bend the metal because he said the metal was very malleable, and whenever he would bend it, it didn't matter, it always go back into its original shape. It had very strange properties. And there's another guy from around that time named Philip Corso, who worked in the military, and he wrote a book where he claims he was in charge of reverse engineering what they found at the Roswell crash. And from that, we got things like computer chips and Kevlar and, fiber optics, lasers, all kinds of different technologies that we use today in our modern setting. And when you look at the time frame of when he's claiming this is happening, you know what I mean, throughout the 40s all the way up into the 60s, you can't find any trace of what he was doing in the military. It shows that he's in the military, but what he was working on was classified. And not only that, but the technological jumps that we've seen in that time and since that time totally correlate with what he's saying. Everything that he's saying, we took from the Roswell crash was invented within a couple decades of the Roswell crash. And and all the things with extraterrestrials, it plays into ancient astronaut theory, which is something that I definitely believe in. And for any unfamiliar with that, ancient astronaut theory is that any divine beings or angels or gods that were witnessed by our ancient ancestors were not actually gods and angels, but extraterrestrials, and they were misinterpreted because when our ancestors saw it, they couldn't understand what they were seeing. It was nothing they had ever seen before. And with almost every religious book that you can read that fits into that criteria, when they describe these, they always descend from the sky. Most of the time they needed some sort of chariot to be able to do so. And there's much more evidence of this that plays into different things, like the monolithic structures and how they were built, like the pyramids of Giza in these ancient times, and how they claim the gods helped them build these pyramids. So that's something that I personally believe in. I think that has more of a ringing of truth to it from my research and my experiences in my life. And that's sort of how this plays into my theories of higher dimensions, is because not only do I think that they helped to jumpstart civilization and get humans going, but I think that they've also been leaving clues and hints as to higher dimensions and how to possibly reach them in the stars, and that's all part of the test that we're under right now, where they're watching us and they're sort of waiting for us to figure it out and giving us a little bit of stimuli at a time to kind of further it along. Those are my personal beliefs on that subject, and a lot of that comes from patterns that I've found in math and geometry and sort of the symbols. And I've talked a little bit about it on my page, how certain numbers, if you picture them in a 3D setting, can look the same. And there's perfect geometry if you overlap certain numbers that already have patterns correlated with them. And the perfect geometry that shows up with them uses a lot of right angles and triangles and different things, and things that you would definitely need to plan ahead for those patterns to align. And for the geometry to appear in these symbols is very strange, especially the precision of it, because these symbols that we use are based on Hindu Arabic symbols, which are long outdate, you know what I mean, geometry, and ancient Greece and Pythagoras time, where we really started to get a hold on geometry. So I think that literally we've been given clues and hints on how to reach the next level, and they're sort of waiting for us to figure it out. And I think that's what a lot of the crop circles that I post about and I talk about are doing as well. They're just part of the hints and they're part of the clues. I mean, we have ones that we've already solved that are like messages, like the pie crop circle, where, different ellipses of it and the way that it broke off, breaking it into 10 sections, you were able to determine that the expression was pi. And for that sort of thing to show up, where it's a new expression of a mathematical constant in which we've never seen before, I think that that's significant, and it stands out big time among any of the other ones that have even appeared, because for somebody to be able to come up with that, they would have to be beyond a genius, and then to be able to perfectly imprint it on a field, in my opinion, is impossible by humanity's standards. Just to come up with something like that, not only, and then also have the ability to print it on a field under the circumstances that these crop circles appear in. There's also the melatonin crop circle that I shared, where they were able to translate that what the crop circle was expressing was actually the sign of melatonin. And when you start looking at crop circles in that light, that they're messages and that they're clues and they're hints, there's different patterns that emerge that always suggest sort of a higher dimensional nature. And that's why I believe that they're also part of the hints and part of the clues. And right now, we're just being observed and tested, and they're waiting to see how long it takes us to figure it out. So yeah, if you want to check out anything more to do with this, you can always check out the page. I post about extraterrestrials and things to do with that quite often. It's the J-Axis page. Or check out the community page, All Corners of the Multiverse, where it's me and a bunch of other people collectively talking about all kinds of crazy different subjects. And stay tuned for the next episode. Not quite sure what it's going to be yet, but as soon as I know, I'll let you know. Thank you for tuning in.